Hey everyone, this is Zephyr, and welcome to the Bailey Wiki channel, where we teach everyday DMs how to create truly amazing experiences for their players by combining art and technology. We also make modular systems and scenes for Foundry VTT that you can use without any setup, some of which are going to be the backdrop for today's video, where we are highlighting a major update to one of our favorite modules for Foundry, and that is Gambit's FXMaster. For those of you who don't know, FXMaster is an incredible visual effects module that allows you to add all kinds of particle and filter effects and browse through your animations quickly and easily. And Gambit has released his V7 of FXMaster with a host of new quality of life features, tweaks, bug fixes, and entirely new capabilities to the suite. So we're doing another deep dive on FXMaster, going through everything you need to know about FXMaster V7, from the basics to the advanced, and all of the need-to-know changes on V7 going forward. If that all sounds good, let's dive right in. To get started with Gambit's FXMaster, all of the tools are going to be under the Effect Controls tool panel. It looks like a wand with some particles around it. And then we'll see we have a few different options here. So first we have our tools active, being visible. The first tool that we're going to take a look at is Animation Effects, which is going to open this Animation Effects Management window here. If you've seen our video on FXMaster, that was a part of our series on the most popular modules in Foundry, this should look a little familiar to you. This is going to be a browser for all of the different animations that you have in your Foundry installation, sourced from the most popular animation modules. Some of those include the Jack Kerouac's animated spell effects packages, JB2A, Jinkers, and also Bailey This automatically scans through all of your different modules that are installed and indexes them. And when you hover, you can see the different animations kind of preview through for you, and it will pause on the last frame, and many of them will also have thumbnails generated as well. When it comes to using these, you can simply drag and drop them, and it will place the asset automatically scaled to your scene and your grid size. If you want to adjust any of these sizes, you can of course resize it like a traditional tile. You can also right-click on these before you drop it in, and you'll get a lot of different information. You can favorite things to make them stick to the top. Then you can see also the author, file names, and the file paths. And if this is a sequencer database type animation, such as the JB2A ones, then it will also show you the sequencer DB path for using in sequencer macros. But then the thing we're concerned about here is our scaling and our anchors. You can simply just increase your scaling, say by 2, and now it'll drop in substantially larger. And if you adjust the anchors, then it's going to choose where it's dropping in relation to your mouse when you bring things in. So you can use that to make some adjustments there if you have a specific way you want to place things. To demonstrate that sequencer DB path, you can see that here on this JB2A chevron asset that you can use and grab that for putting into your sequencers, macros, and things like that. And again, of course, you have those file paths and everything. If you want to index some additional animations, say you have a custom folder where you put in animations, or if you have installed a new animation module since you enabled FXMaster and its auto indexing occurred, if you go into your game settings for FXMaster, you can put in the path for your custom animations folder, and it will tell you that that also requires a animations database refresh. And that's simply clicking this tick box here, and then when you save changes, it will untick that and run the indexing. So once that's run, you'll have any additional modules that you've installed since the last time it was run. Normally you'll have a bar going through at the top indexing everything, but if you don't have anything new to index, then it's going to happen pretty much instantaneously. The next feature of FXMaster, and the one that's probably more well known for, is particle effects. When you click on the icon, you open up the particle effects management window here, and this is going to apply all kinds of particle effects to your scene. And this is scene-wide. It functions very similarly to the ambiance section in scene configuration where you can put in weather effects. And in fact, it also populates that list if you want to use those there. But where the effects management gets a lot more interesting is if we turn on, say, fog here, we will notice that the fog fills into the scene, and we can make all kinds of adjustments here in terms of the tinting, or we can also make things now appear below tokens, which is a brand new feature in V7. And so you can have tokens that are going to be above the fog here, and you can do this for different things. For example, we have fog below tokens, but then we could turn on our rain, and that will appear above our token. So this is not an all or nothing game. One thing you'll also probably notice if you have used FXMaster prior to version 7 is that loading in and removing these effects is a lot snappier than it once was. Some effects still take a little bit, such as the fog and clouds. However, the vast majority of them are pretty quick for populating and also depopulating. So that has been a major improvement for the quality of life as you're switching through and adjusting things. Speaking of adjusting things, if we have our fog back on, then there are several things that you can tweak here. Tinting, of course, allows you to change colors, so you can really customize the look of these different effects. You can have this very creepy blood red fog going on. And increasing things like your scale will increase the size of the particles. Speed will make things move faster. Lifetime makes things linger longer. Density is the amount of particles that are on the screen, and your opacity is, of course, the opacity of those effects. We can demonstrate some of those things a little bit better with the clouds, and clouds also have some easy to see aspects with the speed. You can see they really zoom across the screen here when I crank up the speed, and we can change their directions, which will adjust how they are going across the screen, and all of those other good pieces. There's more than just weather, of course. We also have things like leaves for giving some nice fall atmosphere here. You can see the particle effects match really nicely with some of the leaves that we have on this scene. So it creates a really cool effect. And we can, of course, change things down. We can, say, reduce the lifetime on these a little bit and reduce the density. So that then we have a few less leaves falling to give that cool effect that matches in with the rest of the scene. And you also have all kinds of animal effects, such as bats to fly around here in the night. You can also add in things like crows, rats, and spiders. So there are a whole lot of different effects to play with. If you've found a combination of effects that you really like, then you can use this Save Particle and Filter Effects as macro button, and it will create a macro for you. And you can use this to apply all of the same presets on a new scene. So you can call this, say, Particle Effects - Spooky or something to that effect. And if we go to another scene, we can activate that macro and it will apply all of our effects for us, which is quite nice and handy. Then we can also see that everything lights up now, which is a new feature in V7. It is going to actually show you what's active on a given scene when you have used a macro, and it's going to reflect the values of that macro and what it's set, as opposed to just using a global set of modifiers. And so if we turn all of that off, then it will disappear. We fire that macro again. We'll see that everything gets turned on and their settings adjusted, so it's a lot easier to keep straight what particle effects you have going on when you're using those macros, and it's actually picking up the values that are being set by the macros. You see the same thing of, say, if we drop or crank the scale up on crows quite a bit. we run the macro, it's going to readjust back down to that 1. So that's a new feature in FXMaster v7. A close cousin of the particle effects is filter effects. And this is another fantastic way to add a lot of ambiance to a scene. You can see we have all kinds of options here. One that I like quite a bit for different things is the old film option. You can see it takes the entire scene and makes it this kind of sepia tone vibe and adds some grain going on. And it's just a really neat effect. You can also do things like below tokens on filters now as well, which is going to put the tokens above the filter, which can give you some really interesting effects when you can mix and match and combine these. There's also all kinds of other options, such as the predator vision type effect, and things like underwater for if you are doing an underwater scene. And it adds this cool kind of swimmy look to everything. You can also add just color grading if you want to really adjust how different things look. You can add a whole color shade to things independent of how the lighting works in the scene configuration and all of those pieces. So it's a neat tool to have in your toolbox because you can also do things like adjusting your saturation or your contrast as a part of that as well, which can lead to some very interesting effects and combinations when you're trying to really create some interesting scene ambiance. If while you're doing these things, you have adjusted something and you're really far off of the base, for example, if we have that strong red tint for the color turned on, we have our saturation way up and our contrast wacky, and you're not sure what values were the starting point, or you've just messed with too many things and it's kind of overwhelming at this point to adjust. If you go into your configure settings for FXMaster, there's this reset particle and filter parameters. And if you hit save changes, it will reset the parameters, but you'll notice that all of our effects that are currently active are going to maintain their settings. So we're not erasing anything we've done if we're happy with it. So if we go in and we turn off this color filter, and now when we go in here and reset the parameters, we look at color and we'll see that now the tint's gone, everything is back to those baseline values. So if you've made a lot of experiments and you were just too far off and unsure how to get back to kind of a reasonable baseline here, simply turn off the filters and particle effects that you want to reset and use that reset particle and filter parameters option in your settings, and it will set everything back to the normal baseline. Now that we've discussed a bit about our particle effects and our filters that are applying scene-wide, let's take a look at how to mask areas off that we might not necessarily want those to affect. I've got my fog and my old film grain applied, as well as all of our animals and leaves flying around, and I've set up a region here, and we've named it weather blocking. Within this, you've got 3 options for suppressing the weather. If you use the Foundry stock suppress weather behavior and you turn that on, it is going to completely remove all of the filter effects and particle effects within that area. You can see you have this hard edge on everything. Turning that off, you also have the new FXMaster behaviors of suppress scene filters and suppress scene particles, and these are going to suppress just one of those channels respectively. So if I turn off the suppress filters, of course, then our old film grain is not present in our big rectangle here, but all of our particle effects still are. And of course, if I turn on the suppress scene particles, then old film grain is still here, but the fog and all of our animals and everything are not present in this area. So that's how you can suppress things. It's worth noting that FXMaster has completely done away with the use of drawings for masking things. It used to be before 7 that you could have a masking option to get rid of that, but that's no longer the case. Also worth noting is that since drawings have been removed, there is also no longer an option to invert particle masking so that things are contained inside of the drawings rather than being excluded from the drawings. Everything can be done using regions, and so if you are using any scenes that you've set up using drawings for FXMaster, you'll have to redo those with regions. But this is a much better system, and keeping it all in one place is a lot more intuitive. In addition to masking off effects where we don't want them to go using regions, we can also use regions to create areas or zones of those effects. So here on a new scene, I'm going to create a new region by just drawing out this circle. And we will name this, say, the effects area. And in behaviors, we can go through and there are FXMaster particle effects as well as filter effects. We'll start with particles here. And within this area, we can enable different pieces. So we have autumn leaves, bats, etc. I'm going to go ahead and find our... So if I turn on enable embers within this area and update the region behavior and update the region itself, we'll notice now that we have these cool ember effects going on just in this localized area around the fire. So that's a nice simple application of adding in those regions, but we can also get a lot more complex with it. In addition to having these static effect regions, we can also subscribe those regions to events such as tokens entering to trigger a particle effect like this fog, and leaving to turn off those particle effects. This also applies to filter effects. And we can see if I open up my region here and look at the behavior, the big thing right here is the subscribed events just below the behavior status, and we have enters and exits. Again, enters will turn things on, exits will turn things off. So you could have things be just on when someone's entered there and then never turn it off, or you can have it when someone leaves an area, it'll turn off, but won't have behavior the other direction. The enters and exits, it's what's going to make it a toggle. Now, there is also another concept that is new in FXMaster v7, and you'll see that when Gomer goes up to 10 feet, he can see this snow here, and same thing with Angus, who's already at 10 feet. And when I don't have them selected, then I cannot see the snow. So this is these particle effect regions respecting elevation, and that is a really big new feature here in v7. You can see I have this region set up, and in my identity, I have my elevation set up to be from 10 to 20. And this is important because when I go into my behaviors, I have this option for elevation constraints. By default, it's going to be this blank or none, which means it's not going to care about elevation. Then you have tokens POV and specific tokens POV. More on the last one in just a moment. For tokens POV, it's basically saying, is the selected token within the elevation bounds of the region? It doesn't care if the token is inside of the region in terms of the X and Y coordinates. It only cares if it is in the elevation range. So in this case, from 10 to 20. Any token that is between 10 feet and 20 feet is going to be able to see things. Otherwise, it will not. It's only going to render if that token is controlled and only for the users controlling that token. Even if you and another player both have ownership permissions of a token that is at that particular height, unless you're both controlling it, only one of you is going to see things. You can also turn on this always visible for GM so that you can see everything regardless of the POV, which can be helpful for certain things as a GM, but depending upon your setup, it might get a little cluttered. Now, the other piece here is this token UUID. This is only important if you're using the specific tokens POV, and this essentially just adds another layer here. If we turn this on and update our behavior, then when we go to our tokens, Angus no longer sees this, but Gomer does. And that's because I copied Gomer's token ID. So for this, all you have to do is right-click on the little copy document UUID in your token configuration, and then it'll give you that little pop-up saying that you've copied it. And then when you go into the region controls, you can then paste that in the token UUID section and hit enter, and then you'll have the specific tokens POV. Unfortunately, right now, this doesn't seem to be working with Tagger, but I'm sure that feature will be updated soon. And right now, you can just paste in those UUIDs, and essentially what's happening then is it's checking, is the control token within the height range? And is it one of the specified token UUIDs? If yes, render the effect. So this allows you to have some interesting capabilities where you can have things displayed only to certain types of users or to certain individuals if you want to have a weird effect going on because of someone's backstory or some mechanical thing going on with them in a particular scene. In addition to the particle effects, we also have the same options with filters. You can see I have a region set up here with a blue color filter. And if we go into our region effects, you'll see that these have the same options that we just discussed with particle effects. We can have it listen to tokens entering and exiting to turn things on and off, and also to have these elevation constraints so that people can only see it at the appropriate heights. But then another new feature with FXMaster v7 is this edge fade percent. And this is available on all of the different filter effects, and this makes the filters a whole lot more flexible. If we up this number a little bit, we can see now that we have these soft edges. So this is basically adding attenuation or like a blur radius to the edges of this. So instead of having these sharp lines on the effects, it is instead going to soften things, which makes it a whole lot more flexible for using just out in different areas of the world rather than it just being a hard line where you have to have either things that make a lot of sense for it to be running into or some other kind of trickery to hide those edges. So it makes them a lot more flexible and a lot more interesting. One caveat with this, though, is that with these effects, I have found that if you use multiple shapes, then it will no longer respect the edges because it's trying to find these different edges in different locations. That might be a limitation of just how things work in Foundry right now, or it might be something that Gambit is able to fix later down the line. But if you run into this, then don't worry, you haven't lost all of your data. You can just remove the excess shapes and it will work as normal. You can use polygon shapes and everything with these, so you are completely free to have as strange of a shape as you want. Just be aware that if you're adding additional shapes, including holes, it will throw things off and you'll need to make separate regions, which can make it a little tricky for some of these. As an example application here, I've got this scarecrow scene where we have the area around this ritual site is surrounded with a fog filter, which works a little differently than the particle effect. We can see this is kind of billowing around, but because of these soft edges and the way the filter works, it looks very seamless. There's not some hard line that is really easy to discern, so it makes it super clean. And we can also just see the contrast really quickly if I drop this down to 0. That now we have that really harsh edge. So this makes it way more flexible for adding these cool effects throughout your maps and scenes. I want to take this time real quick to shout out the different settings for FXMaster. First off is enable effects. This is per client, and this basically just turns on and off the particle and filter effects for that particular client. All the data is still there, it just doesn't render for that particular user. This has no effect on animated tiles like WebMs that are placed using the animation effects manager. It's just affecting particle effects and filter effects used by the scene-wide controls or by regions. So you can turn this off, or your players can turn this off if they have lower end hardware, but you still want to be making use of the module elsewhere. Custom animations folder, as we mentioned in the animations manager section, is where you can specify a specific folder in your assets that you may have put custom animation files there. Refresh animations database, similarly, is for relinking and rescanning all of your animation modules, including your animations folder. Reset particle and filter parameters is going to reset everything to the default, except for the things that are currently active. Then we have the Use FXMaster Special Effects permissions, and this is basically who can control all of the tools on the left. By default, this is Assistant GM and up. You could expand this to be trusted players and up, or keep it just for the GM. And then finally, we have Disable FX for everybody, and this just turns off all of the particle and filter effects, similar to turning off enable effects. This is mainly there as kind of a failsafe in case something went wrong in some kind of migration. You should basically never need to use this. That's all there is to it on the settings front, though. Finally, we're going to go through a recap of some important things to know with V7 and some miscellaneous features that have been added in. First, you can see here that all of the effects actually end at the bounds of the scene. They don't continue into the padded area anymore, and they don't take up the whole canvas when you're rendering this, so everything stays nice and neat inside of just the scene boundaries, which is also nice for some performance reasons. There have also been some various tweaks to different filters, one of the big ones here being the thunder and lightning filter here. So with the lightning filter, you can increase the period if you want this to have longer time between the flashes. And then perhaps most interestingly here is the thunder aware option, which makes the filter sound sensitive. So I have a sound beacon in the background that is doing a loop of thunder sounds, and we can set our bass threshold, etc. And that's actually what's controlling when this lightning flash is happening. I'm not just that good at fine-tuning my settings to make it line up. I can hit Thunder Aware, and because of Foundry V13's features and FXMaster V7, it's able to actually listen for those sound inputs to create that effect, which is super cool. And again, a reminder that the drawings no longer do anything for FXMaster. You can't use them for masking filters or for putting the filters and particles inside of them. You need to use regions exclusively. There have also been some other refinements, as we mentioned earlier. The time that it takes for particles to pop in and pop out is greatly reduced, so you can make adjustments much more quickly and readily. There's also been some different UI tweaks to make the windows resize more cleanly and generally an overall nicer experience. Gambit's done a phenomenal job here with V7, and it is a really fantastic experience to use it. If you want to support Gambit, you can also join his Patreon, where you'll get access to the FXMaster Plus module, which gives you some additional filters and particle effects to use, such as these fireflies, ghosts, and this sunlight filter that I've tweaked a little bit to look a little more like moonlight. It's a really cool way to add some spooky vibes to this haunted forest very easily and very effectively. So if you want to support Gambit, go ahead and show him some love on Patreon, and you can get a hold of some extra special effects to boot, which is a part of that FXMaster Plus module, which is now officially integrated with Foundry's Patreon linking system, so you can install it directly from the add-on module browser once you have supported him on Patreon and linked it to your Foundry account. And that's going to conclude this deep dive on Gambit's FXMaster. Hopefully you learned something new, including all of the great new changes with V7 of this fantastic module. And you've also seen with some of our demonstrations just how powerful some of these new features can be. You can get really creative with how you link these together, and it just adds yet another layer to this already fantastic module for really adding a lot of ambiance and flair to your games. Let us know in the comments what you think about all of these new changes and what ideas it's given you for setting things up in your own games. This has been Zephyr with the Bailiwiki channel. If you enjoyed this video, then subscribe to keep up with all of our latest content and consider becoming a patron. Not only do you support the channel, we also gain access to all of the modular systems and scenes that we've made for Foundry, including the ones used in today's video. I also want to thank Gambit for not only his incredible work on this module, but also for letting us have an advanced copy that we could use to preview and put this deep dive together. Once again, this has been Zephyr. Thank you so much for watching, happy gaming, and have a good one.